The city of Bristol lies at the southern extremity of Gloucestershire and the northern of Somersetshire, being taken out of and made a city and county, independent of both, by Edward III. It has two rivers which run through it, the Avon and the Froom. Its principal is the Avon, and the city is built at about 8 miles from its mouth or discharge into the Bristol Channel or Severn Sea. It stands in a most delightful and healthy country, and is surrounded with numerous verdant hills, some of moderate and others of towering height, particularly to the north and east, which defend it from the cold winds and render its situation warm and comfortable. The loftiest hill is Dundry to the south, from which there are grand and very distant prospects. The country is far more beautiful about Bristol, and it has more varied prospects than about London. The circumjacent regions are variegated with high and wholesome downs, sweetened with odoriferous plants and herbs, fruitful valleys, watered with rivers, brooks and rivulets, sublime rocks, thick woods, beautiful scenes of nature, and most pleasing prospects of land and water. In its vicinity are many pleasant and handsome villages, and seats of nobility and gentry, happily situated. These, and the above-mentioned circumstances, generally attract the attention and excite the approbation of travellers and foreigners. A general description of the situation of modern Bristol thus taken is that it stands in a vale, on eminences and level grounds, and on steep and lofty hills to the north and west of it, the heights of which are sudden and inconvenient for carriages. The summits of these hills, Kingsdown, St. Michael's and Brandon Hill, are about 250 feet in perpendicular height above the rivers, and consequently the lower buildings of Bristol appear from their tops to be in a deep valley, and the spectator is above the top of the highest steeple in the city. Yet several of the lower parts stand on fine elevations from the river, the ascents from which were formerly too steep, but by late improvements are rendered easy and not inconvenient for trade and heavy carriages. The old town or city, primarily built, and which was within the inner wall, stands on a hill of 40 feet of perpendicular height, between the rivers Avon and Froom, from which eminence there is every way a descent. Thus the heart of the city, which is most crowded, being seated on a hill, and the streets intersecting each other at right angles in several places, it has a free admission and circulation of air. This city is said to resemble ancient Rome, as it stands on 7 hills. Its principal river, the Avon, is yellow and rapid like the Tiber, though inferior in breadth. The hills are, first, that on which stood the old city, which is now in the centre, the walls of which were nearly circular, and had 5 or 6 gates. Second, that on which stood the castle to the east, which was bounded by the Avon on the south, the Froom on the north, and by a deep ditch, or moat, now partly arched over, on the east. Third, to the west, the College Green, a considerable and pleasing eminence, and on which stands the Cathedral Church. Fourth, to the south of the Avon, at about 3 furlongs from Bristol Bridge, Redcliffe Hill, on which are the famous church of that name, and several other streets and places. Fifth, St. Michael's Hill, of great height, and covered with a variety of houses and streets up to the summit. Sixth, Kingsdown, part of which is in the city, on which are many modern houses and pleasant gardens. Seventh, Brandon Hill, The chasm between this and St Michael's is Park Street. This hill, though its base is almost surrounded with buildings, is not yet built over, though on it are lately erected Berkeley Square, Great George Street and Charlotte Street, and it is hoped that the corporation will, in due time, reserving the upper part for prospect, let out all the rest for building, and thus effect, below and above, an elegant and convenient conjunction between Bristol and Clifton. These last three grand eminences exhibit countless beauties, and are in general covered with houses rising street over street to their very tops, which command various delightful views of the city and of the country for several miles around. Strangers, who are spectators from the opposite hills, and from some parts of the city and suburbs, are struck with agreeable surprise at the sight of a large town hanging in a continued slope, as it were, from the very clouds. The two rivers, which run all through the town and turn and wind to so many parts of the valleys, receive and carry off the filth and noxious effluvia. There are very few, if any, houses that have not had a communication with the main sewers, a provision for cleanliness not so universal in any city in the world. Thus is Bristol, by nature and situation, a very healthy town. Many agreeable circumstances render it so. Its air is well known and experienced to be undeniably and notably salubrious. The advantageous circumstances of the situation of Bristol, taken altogether, may not be readily paralleled. A deep navigable river flows through the middle of it, which will bring a 50-gun ship of war up to Bristol Bridge. This river flows with such a strong and rapid course that the largest ships go up and down in one tide. Strangers who shall be desirous to view the city may be recommended to Brandon Hill, a pleasant, lofty, conic eminence, which rises almost to a point and is partly covered with verdure and some bushes. In the times of Charles I, the top of this hill was fortified by the monarchy against the Parliament, and part of the walls and trenches yet remain. As Bristol is surrounded with many delightful hills, the prospects of the city are varied and beautiful. The park, St Michael's, is one of the most pleasing places about the town. This presents views of the new buildings at the western part of the city, and of the house of the late Thomas Tyndale, Esquire, at the fort, which is a capital mansion built of stone with three dissimilar fronts towards the park. Bristol, its appendages and environs, contain about 600 streets, squares, open places, alleys and courts, 47 superb or handsome places of worship, 10 markets for various commodities, 4 hotels, 50 inns and taverns, 7 banking houses, and 4 prisons. It is the capital city, quay, and great mart of the western parts, and one of the principal cities of Europe.